Time. Okay, you're on.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for waiting for us to get everything working. It's always a little bit of a challenge in here at the studio to make things copacetic. And as always, I'd like to give a shout and a thank you to Paula Gloria Barton and her assistance in making such lovely, seamless shows as an engineer and teching for me. So, Conant Show, this is Wednesday, the 25th of April, 2018. And as promised last week, I'm here this week. These Wednesdays are going by awfully fast, folks. They really they sneak right up on me, and you know, you try to have a good plan, and life happens, you know, while you're busy making plans, and sometimes death happens. And the past, I'd say 3 weeks, a good company of mine, company of friends, and both in a business sense company, but also as a company, as in we all are very good close friends, as much family, really, you know. And for a bunch of us in this group over there in Sharon and Cornwall, Connecticut, and by extension Woodstock, because there's a few of us over here. Shout out to Harper Blanchett, who made Woodstock his home a couple years ago. A member of our company, and I'll give a little background. Our company is dedicated to cleaning the earth, and the thing is that we're a breakthrough technology company, and we kind of splintered over the years. I have my own, which is called Turtech, and then my partner company that I was think tanking for 38 years. That's how long the friendships go in this company. Is called Panther, and the idea is that we are representing an alkaline surfactant detergent system that is very effective at breaking down hydrocarbons with water, or oil and water. And that project is a big project and a long ongoing project, because there's a lot of resistance in our corporate control paradigm to keep breakthrough technologies like this under wraps, because they work. Now, that's a whole other subject for a whole other show, but the founder of this think tank and company, Panther, is Andrew Nixon, Andrew Chester Nixon, and I met Andy around 1980 in a place called West Cornwall, Connecticut, and he was having an open house to discuss and introduce this breakthrough technology, and that's where, you know, I met Andy all those years ago. And, you know, Andrew was a real remarkable fellow. He just took anybody in that came to his house, and, you know, you could get a bite to eat and crash on a couch and, you know, kind of pull yourself together, and off you could go. And so he was always a very kind and caring person. And part of that may have been because him and his twin brother, Peter, were adopted as babies. And Peter was also a good friend of mine, passed away 3 years ago, and I think really that contributed to Andrew's demise and slipping away. It was cancer that did get him. But you know, Andrew went out on his own terms, and he's left a lot of people behind here in the Earth world, a big hole. You know, I'm really feeling it tonight. I feel a real treasured friend of mine is. I've had my last cup of coffee with him this morning. You know. We had lots of cups of coffee in those think tanking days, and in seeing his shell with the spirit having left the building already, brought up a lot of feelings, and for all of us connected to Andy. So I'm going to do a show with some photographs and do a little slideshow of Andy and our group and some discussion of our accomplishments in our effort to bring this technology out, but also where the vision is now and where it needs to go, and that as Andy was slipping away in the past few days and he was still conscious, I just told him, I said, Andy, the project keeps going, It doesn't stop with you. You don't have to worry. Let all your earthly worries go, because the project's in good hands with the rest of us that are remaining. In 38 years, our core group had grown and shrunk with the passing seasons and years, and at this point, there's, I would say, maybe about 5 or 8 of us left. Out of a group of maybe 40 people. And now it's the next generation. Andy's son and his grandchildren that are here now, and of course others of us in the group have had children in that time, and my daughter, Lila Nona, whom you've met actually in one of my shows, is also interested in taking the technology on and bringing it to the Indian nations in Canada. So things change, people. Things change, and it was a real complicated set of feelings today. Real complicated set of feelings. Seeing a lot of the great people I hadn't seen in a long time, and that brings up its own wellspring of feelings. So as a shout out to Andy Nixon, happy trails, my friend. And I guess I'll see you again sometime in some other dimension. Moving right along.
Just a second. Before you
sure,
move
go ahead.
Too quick, because it's so touching and important, and using community TV also in a way that I think should be explored more, feelings. Were some of the feelings that you felt, particularly when you saw people you hadn't seen for a while, feelings of opportunity missed in any way? Or am I just projecting what I go through?
I don't know, but you're welcome to pan to you when you talk to me, only because it helps the audience not have to look at me the whole time. There's Paula. So what's the question again? Kind of phrase that again. I want to hear that again.
I just feel there's so much depth in what you said, and you had asked me to come with you to videotape. And Joe and I were embroiled in so much. I'm wondering, did I brush off too quickly? Could I have helped meet that need of yours to get some of those last thoughts? And what are those last thoughts? What is the inner life like of these energy people, free energy, whatever you want to call it?
Well, there's a lot of you gave me a lot there to kind of answer to. As far as like the lost opportunity or getting a last probably a last interview, because Andy did do some interviews over the years. I think the place where Andrew had arrived by the time I floated the idea of a video interview, I have a feeling he probably would have declined because of his state that he was in. As acute as his mind was, he was in a very bad way, and he was in a great deal of pain because of the illness. So, in answer to that question, no, I don't. I think we had a good idea, but I think ultimately Andy was not in good enough shape to do an interview.
Well, had he been, what would
4
what
weeks
did you want
earlier
to talk to?
he was making a recovery.
And what did you want to talk about at
With
that
Andrew?
interview? What were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, I really kind of wanted Andrew to share his wisdom and vision, knowing that his work was as far as he could take it in the body that he had. And it wasn't just his work, but it was our work. And it was a very large and far-reaching vision that he had. And I'm the guy who kind of started that large and daunting vision going as a result of a conversation I had in 1978 with my dad, who told me to look for a water-based degreaser because that would not only, fulfill the need to replace the toxic liquid degreasers, which is the largest single market on the planet. Fully 1/3 of our planet's money supply is tied up in that, and that's what my dad shared with me. And the first day that I met Andrew, when he told me what he had, of course, I still had this fresh in my mind from one of my very, very few, adult life encounters with my father. And so I grilled Andy for, maybe an hour that first day. And then once I was satisfied that he was worthy of what I was holding on to, I sat him down and I said, okay, now you're going to listen to me. And I unloaded on him everything my father had said about how toxic the toxic liquid degreasers are, trichloroethylene, tetrahydrochloride, and so on, and that these chlorinated benzene, right, which is gasoline, don't occur in nature. They're very, very toxic. And since the 1920s, that was the big industrial secret and push. The secret was, don't let the public know how poisonous this stuff is. And the push was finding the invention that will replace the toxic nightmare. And Dad said back in 1978, now if you find a product that does this, not only will you be replacing the toxic degreaser market, but you're going to clean up the mess that they made in the environment. That was how far-reaching my father's understandings were. So when I explained to Andrew that first day all of that, and additionally that the reason that this is such a critical issue environmentally and economically is that every factory everywhere on this planet uses liquid degreasers and repair shops, okay? Every one of them uses them because the chlorinated benzenes, right, trichloroethylene, is the industry standard for cleaning the product and also leaving an oil film on the product so it doesn't flash oxidize. If it's a metal or a material that's a worry, right? So that's why it has been always this chlorinated benzene, basically. So this, aspect of the market being the single largest market on the planet because every factory everywhere uses these liquid toxic degreasers to not only clean the product and parts and pieces they're making, but the equipment that makes them. So we're talking millions of metric tons of toxic materials being generated for disposal every day for the last century. Try to wrap your brain around that, people. Okay? So this is millions of metric tons around the world are being dumped into the environment. They've gotten a little better about it. I don't know how much better, not much better, but they've gotten somewhat better since the 1970s because they've been kind of cornered into the toxicity of it all by the many, many studies around the world. And so the industrial practices had to start reclaiming the used product. And so they kind of filter it and sort of spice it up. And so they use it over a couple of times. And then they dump it into the environment.
But don't they also just sort of move it around? They're not really solving the problem?
No, they're not solving the problem they're at all. They do just, there is that barges full of toxic materials, but it's not necessarily liquid degreasers. That's usually radioactive materials or contaminated soils, which could be oils and derivatives of hydrocarbons or radioactive materials as well.
No, but George, once on one show you were talking about cleaning up an Indian place that was supposed to spend millions of dollars to pump
Yes.
out? And
Yeah,
then,
well-
and then I said, well, what exactly do you get for the millions of dollars?
Okay,
And
it was a
apparently they
30,
pump it out
30
and take it.
it was a 20 to 30 million dollar project to excavate 30 feet deep and an area the size of 3 football fields. And all of that material would have to be removed and taken to a storage facility in Albany, New York. What they do with it from there, I'm not sure. I guess in some instances they burn the soil. In other instances they electrify it. They've called vitrification, or they just simply store it. And that's when I was approached by the.
But just a second, slow down. This thing about storing it, if you have a representative in a state, different representatives, it seems as though the low man on the totem pole has to have the storage units. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem
Not
fair.
necessarily, because they can charge a lot of money for rent.
Well,
There are towns out in Nevada that have taken on storing radioactive materials for a tidy rent, and that pays their municipal bills. So
Yeah, but
in
the
other words,
people-
what I'm saying is yes, there is a bit of a shell game going on here, and moving the toxic material around represents money. I think, and the show that you're thinking of, it may have been the same show, is when I was talking to the fellow who was into reclaiming oil from oil spills on water.
Uh-huh.
And when he heard what I had, that was the last thing he wanted to hear, is that we could solve the problem of disposing of the oil by converting it into from hydrocarbons to carbohydrates, fish food, and make a non-toxic fertilizer similar to a fertilizer kind of material that would then break down 98% in 8 days in the environment. So that solves the storage and movement problems. And he said, well, no, I can't talk to you anymore because you're going to put me out of business. We make money on moving the stuff around. We don't want we like a good toxic mess. Mm-hmm. So it was a conflict of interest to actually do what you say you were doing, which is cleaning up the environment. They're not cleaning it up; they're just pushing it around. They're kind of like, putting a Band-Aid on something that requires a tourniquet. And more. So that's some of the industrial resistance that we ran into. That's just the tip of it. There's many other similar reasons and dynamics involved in the corporate and industrial espionage aspect of this.
Do you think that led to your friend's earlier demise? Because Felicia had indicated that of Randy, that a lot of the tensions and difficulties with the town board and the TV studio led to her early death. In any way, when you told him about your father's vision, was it too much? Or let me personalize this. I often say, am I taking on too much?
Well, that was 38 years ago when the information I gave Andy made his eyes as big as saucers. He knew that he had found something important, and he knew it was big. But I basically came along and told him how big. And he had for the last 38 years has been wrestling with how do you ameliorate a monster that big. And he got into so much research. Not only is the science daunting, and then there's the environmental science and testing, which is cost prohibitive for any small company. Your basic 25 years ago, your basic brine shrimp toxicity test, 12 million a shot, 12 million per test. So that's deliberate. It doesn't need to be that expensive, but they make it that expensive to keep the players off the field, or new players off the field. It's a control paradigm. So Andy studied about molecular modeling and intellectual property and special use patents, many aspects to how he could deliver the technology in the most effective way to get it into the environment and into the use and industry standard practices, and make money to sustain his family and our company. And he put it all together, and there's our archives that Andy has built are extensive archives on protocols and to put this in motion with on the level of licensing, intellectual property, and other really kind of complex business thought. And he got a lot of things going. He went to Turkey and worked with a sultan over there by the name of Ayhan Dayuk, who's really one of the relatives of the Ottoman Empire, from the Mongols, going back to the Mongol age. And I never met Ayhan directly, but I spoke to him on the phone a few times, and it was my company that sent him the product over there to experiment with, where he started bringing fish back to life in the most polluted body of water in the world, which is the Golden Horn of Istanbul, which separates, I think, the Bosphorus Sea and the Mediterranean. I think. Don't hold me to that.
The Sultan must have been pleased.
Well, he's still doing it. All these years later, he's still, building his perfect science, and he back engineered our product because the Americans wouldn't sell it to him anymore.
Why?
Because it works. They don't want anybody cleaning up oil spills or detoxifying water, and that's again that concept is almost for another show, because that has to do with the depopulation agenda. Industry is a weapon. And industrial practices that involve massive pollution of our environment are actually tools.
Okay, there you go. That's an example of where I wanted, and then we can end this if you don't want to go any deeper. You said, he had cancer, and he could no longer do in this body what his soul wanted to do. What would it take to shift things so that he could have stayed in this body, could have overcome the cancer, and could have achieved what I sense you felt was not only still in him, but probably in him better than ever, because he had so much wisdom and experience? Yeah. That was a discussion actually I had shortly before coming here with with Charlie Knox, who's been with Andy from the beginning of this. I met Charlie at that house. That day. Life happens. And in Andy's situation, his only blood relative of his generation was his twin brother, a paternal twin. It wasn't an identical twin, but they sure did resemble each other awfully lot. And Peter had become ill about 7 years ago, and it progressed. And then about 3 years ago, Peter died, which was a shock to me at the time when I found out, because he's a dear friend as well. And something inside Andrew broke, and he never got over it. And now Andy also lost his son at the age of 17 in 1990, and that was Jesse Nixon. And I spoke of this on camera before. That's what brought me to Woodstock. Actually, was Jesse's death. In a roundabout, not too roundabout way, but in a kind of a interesting way. His mom, Ginger, had bought a house just after Jesse died in a car crash, and in Woodstock. And it needed some fixing up, and Andrew was a master carpenter, but Ginger's new boyfriend, Steve Feynman, our local locksmith for many years in Woodstock, didn't like Andy. So I got the job. So I come down from the reservation, and that's how I met Woodstock.
really. I met Cyrus and Nancy Adler cutting firewood in Ginger's backyard, but I was, I guess, on their side of the line, and Nancy and Cyrus came out, and we had a good laugh after a fashion. Then Cyrus asked me to cut all his trees down. But, yeah, it's a really strange trip, this thing called life, and how we all come together. That's another whole story. I'm hoping to have some of my company members come on my show, like Greg Rotello or Charlie Knox or Ralph Huntington, because they really can articulate so many more dimensions of this story than I can recall, especially right now on camera, just having come from my friend's death. I mean, I was with him last night till 11 o'clock, and then again this morning I went to go ceremonium off with, my thoughts and prayers, and have a last cup of coffee with him. So I sat with Andy's body there until the funeral home director came and recovered the body.
Well, it certainly seems that you and your group have a very important tale to tell, and that the archives, anything that calls itself an archive, should welcome that.
Yeah. It is a remarkable tale, and it involves the Valdez oil spill. It involves the underground black ooze pollution, toxic plume underneath Akwesasne. It involves an interesting story out at Cattaraugus, where my elder there, Grandma Tai, was using our products for everything from washing dishes to laundry to cars to houses. I mean, she used it everywhere on her property where we had our school. And there was an event there where her son Jim cut a deal with the New York State to take ground up asphalt from roads that were being upgraded. And they wanted to get rid of all this old asphalt, and they dumped it on our tree farm, and it wasn't a small pile. It was 3 piles about 20 feet high and 40 to 60 feet long, and maybe 20 feet wide. So these are big, huge piles of this asphalt ground, chunks and chunks of this stuff of road asphalt, and inside of I would say inside of 8 months, the groundwater was so heavily charged with our product that by capillary action it got absorbed and attacked all of the oil in the asphalt. And when I came to inspect the piles that everybody was upset about, it was just a pile of dirt. Well, and the little pebbles that they make the road out of, when they dump the road on, it was just pebbles and dirt, and the oily material was gone. And now those fields are very productive and nutritious fields, and they were just as green. There was no evidence of toxicity in the soil, visually, that I could detect at all. So I was expecting to see these huge piles, because that's what I saw when I first went to inspect them. And then I went back about 6 months later, and they were gone, absolutely gone. And I said, "Well, how'd these get taken away?" And Twyla just twinkled her eyes and she goes, "They just got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then one day they were gone."
Because she used your product.
Yes, and then the thing is now what's interesting about this is that her farm on Brant Reservation Road is really just less than 30 feet above Lake Erie in altitude, right? And the groundwater was very, very close to the surface, and at the surface during a rainy season or a let of snow in a spring melt. And so the ground itself was very sandy because it had once been the shoreline of Lake Erie. So she had this kind of sandy alluvial deposit kind of land that was very fertile from swamp and trees, detritus, all the things that kind of rot into the soil and make humus and stuff. And that's why it was such a great place for the tree farm, is because the soil was so conditioned. And that's why it was so alarming that when these horribly toxic looking piles were dumped, for them to just sort of spontaneously disappear, because the water in the groundwater was so supercharged with the product, because we had been using it there for over 10 years by that time. I brought the product with me when I went to go live with her and learn her body of knowledge. So, yeah, there's an awful lot of history that is remarkable and really should be chronicled.
Well, bring them down here and I'll tech for you.
Yeah.
I can offer that.
Yeah, that would be great.
So,
when you have an event like this, and I saw it coming. I learned of Andy's illness about 5 months ago, and it was a progression of about 5 years. And 3 years ago, when he lost his brother, that I think he really just wanted to be with his brother. Ralphie told me today. No, Charlie told me today. Andy just drove everywhere. Where Andy drove in his car, he had a picture of his brother on the seat next to him, and he wasn't quite right any longer. But for me, God, we spent probably thousands of hours think tanking on how to approach a control paradigm, a corrupt industrial control paradigm, to convince these mega businessmen of the right thing to do. And I'm more of a hands-on experimenter, and I made discoveries with this product, ways of using it, accidental discoveries, intentional discoveries, and I'll never probably be able to communicate to the world just exactly how profound these events were for me in terms of physically experimenting. I know in this show here, I've done the tabletop experiment for you all in one of my shows. I think it was back around show 28 or 26, where I did the tabletop experiment of crankcase oil or spent oil, clear water, and you shake the two together and the oil just comes to the top, and you have a miniature version of a Valdez spill in a bottle. And then a couple of drops of our super soap, I call it Earthshine, and the oil is immediately dissolved into a homogeneous material with the water, and over time it doesn't just dissolve the oil into the water, but it actually breaks the oil down into the elements: hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and so on. If there's any particulates in it, they get dropped out, whether it's metal filings from an engine or minerals such as sulfur. They drop out of it. And you're left with this white bread-looking like deposit that settles out, and then the water gets clear and there's no film on top. I mean, that's mind-boggling. And that's what my father was talking about. Not only are we going to clean the product, but once they dump the spent soap out with the other stuff they've been dumping, it's going to dissolve that too and make it harmless. So the solutions are here. This is the 1/3 of the entire planet's money supply is tied up in these toxic materials. Yeah, think about that.
Well, reaching those corporations is my interest. How do you communicate with the corporations?
Well, the thing is,
because they're made up of people, and all these people, respond to toxicity. So how do we get all our needs met?
well, the thing is the corporate needs, they have a separate agenda. And
But do they really? There's actually
Yeah, they
people.
do.
There's people that work there. I'm finding this working through the court systems, and even calling up Spectrum. As I've healed more myself and looked at my conflicts and things that my soul wanted to do, and then that horrible frustration when you can't do what you feel your soul was to do. As I work it out, and it's not easy work to do. When I connect with Spectrum executive or those people that you talk to, I'm winding up each time on a better and better note. One 30-year-old was, he was running through all the stuff he was supposed to say. He goes, well, by the time I'm your age, things will be expensive for me too. And I said, no, slow down. And I would delineate it. And by the end, he really felt that I was taking his back so that when he was my age, he wouldn't have to go through these things.
Yeah.
They're just people in the corporations.
I liken it to religions. It's like whether it's Judaism or Buddhism or Catholicism or whatever ism it might be, Islam. You're going to have teachings that ring true to people. You're going, that's, I kind of almost call it the bait and switch almost, where there's a lot of great sayings and teachings from Jesus. There's a lot of great psalms and wisdom from the Judaic traditions. There's a lot of great poetry and philosophy in the Muslim tradition and Hindu and Buddhist, and all of them have great stuff. So that's a good hook. That gets you hooked in. But then, like any organizations, organized religion is populated with people and agendas.
No, boards. Keep the difference. Boards with agendas and hidden people who don't necessarily even believe in this stuff.
Well, exactly. Well, they know that they don't believe in the stuff. The point is that there is an opportunity for control and manipulation of good people. So you have, lots of good people fighting a crusade and a jihad. So the crusaders are being told one thing and the jihadists are being told one thing, and they're killing each other and filling the earth with blood. But at the end of the day, they think they're doing the right thing because that's how they've been directed by their leaders. Whereas, in the corporate reality, one of the things my dad said to me is that, the corporate reality is really no different than the military. You climb the ladder by how many people you're willing to kill, step on, or do in some fashion.
But your product wouldn't work that way. When you're brainstorming with Andy.
No, it didn't work that way at all. Andy was very busy trying to integrate it into the megastructures of the delivery systems to get it to the world in a comprehensive way, and my tact, and this is where we had a difference of opinion, is like, well, you can do that, but I think I'm going to go and private label this stuff and sell it to people and get them using it, directly as my contribution is the most sensible thing, and it's good that I did that because it was my company that was able to ship it over to Turkey, where they did these incredible tests and results and experiments. I mean, some of the most toxic dumps in the world are in that part of the world. And in these toxic dumps, they just started spraying with fire hoses our product into these toxified landfill dump areas. And then in weeks, there were melons and tomatoes growing out of the garbage.
George, I just had a brilliant idea.
What's that?
One of my biggest anxieties was that we're going to become a third world country, because our politicians are not really looking out for us. We're not having real free speech. We're, all the problems, the SWAT teams coming in, no warrants and stuff. If what you say is so, then we could, okay, go ahead, become the third world country, become the toxic dump, and then use your product and clean it all up. And that's when we need our unlimited bandwidth so we can show it to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Be a leader. Woodstock can be a leader.
We actually have some documentary footage of the experiments that Ion Diak did in Turkey, and it may come to pass that I'll be talking to him again, as he is now getting old himself.
Yeah, send him over. Bring him over.
No, he won't leave.
Put him on TV.
He won't leave. I might be able to Skype with him or something, but
he won't leave.
I'll make the effort. I mean, right now our whole group is what's left of our group, because there's been 38 years kills a lot of people.
Yeah.
So we've gotten down to a really small remnant of what we started out as in 1980.
Right.
My company was always pretty much just me, and and still is. However,
that's so nice that you weren't competitive with each other. That you
why
think tanks.
Our business acumen was think tanking.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I am an experimenter, and I'm also a nuts and bolts and hands-on kind of guy, and I filled a need, and the need is to get the product on hand and private label it. So I have all those rights, and I can do all of that. I can private label it, I can manufacture it, I can sell it, I can use it, but for the last 35 years, I've really been educating with it more than anything. I mean, I sold a lot of it, don't get me wrong. I mean, I did make money with it and fed my family for a while. But by and large, the bulk of my work has been just showing people what it can do. Because the resistance in the mind that oil is no longer a problem to clean with a non-toxic, biologically friendly product, that's a big horse pill for people to swallow, especially people who are in that business of degreasing. Degreasing here's another application, is that we could be using this for extracting oil from the ground non-toxically. And it does a beautiful job. It's a superior job. And it doesn't leave a poisonous fingerprint behind, so the aquifers actually get cleaned on the way out.
Wow.
But they won't use it because, like I said, there is a vested interest in keeping the poisons poisonous. And that was, I think, one of the most painful things to discover in this journey with Andy and our companies, was that we knew, everybody in the 60s and 70s knew that the corporate paradigm was not unicorns and rainbows and bunny rabbits. Okay, everybody knows, everybody knew. What we didn't know is just how big the dragons and demons were, and how pervasive that agenda is. So that's really where we're at today. And by extension, your 5G and 4G, any of those G networks and microwave, millimeter wave technologies are an extension of that toxicity. It's just now they've taken the toxicity from the visible and they've brought it into the invisible. And that I think is another blow that hit Andy pretty hard. And that became very apparent shortly before he got sick initially. And he didn't tell us he was sick. I mean, he hid it from everybody. Which makes me think that he really just wanted out at this point. I think he got tired. I know that he didn't make money for a long time, and that was a big pressure point for him. He worried about it. But he did always keep his focus on the big picture. And my focus was always kind of on the picture that I could actually work with and deal with, tactile, hands-on. And
Which is why you're flourishing and he didn't.
well, I'm still here.
Right, right.
And
But look at the knocks you took in the court. Look how much savvy you've gained. Sometimes I think that a lot of these scientists, they're just like little innocent lambs when it comes into the intellectual property theft and so on.
Sure. Nikola Tesla, died broke and beaten. They took everything from him. Edison took a lot from him. These highly gifted people, brilliant, genius people, and this is something that his ex-wife Vicky was saying today, is that she said Andy was a genius. He said Andy couldn't focus on making money. He came from a realm into this earth walk that had a different set of rules and wasn't limited, and his focus was so driven that certain practical needs weren't met, and
but it's not a fault of his. It's actually a fault because of the way his mind works. He's actually underscoring there's something wrong with the money system. It's not necessarily the corporate system. There's no due process. The whole thing of the laws and the statutes and residents and people as in we the people means there's remedy.
yeah.
Everybody who's in jail has consented to it.
Okay.
It's all offer and acceptance.
Yeah. Okay. I really have to press a button on that thought.
Okay.
And that is that when I look at our skies since 2004 to today, I'm looking at an overt assault on our collective health globally. It's not just here in Woodstock or over across the river in Sharon or in Delaware or in California. It is global. All right. But let's just talk about due process and law here in the United States. Now, somewhere around 1993 or so, I was going from my mom's in Connecticut to the Mohawk Reservation, Akwesasne. It's about a 470-mile ride. And I stopped at a gas station in Albany, New York, of all places. I realized I didn't tank up before I left. And while I'm filling the gas tank, next to me at the next pump is an EPA car. I look at it. Now I'm deep into my product. I'm deep into cleaning the environment. And I ask him a few questions. I say, so how's the state of our air now? How are things environmentally? And this EPA worker, who actually happened also to be one of their scientists, I was in Albany after all, he said, well, almost in defiance of reality, the Clean Air Act worked. The air is not only markedly and substantially, but remarkably better than it was, say, in the 1960s or 70s. So by the 1990s, in spite of the resistance by industry to do the wrong thing, to not do the right thing, that was like really there. In spite of all of that resistance, the Clean Air Act actually worked. It worked so good that that's kind of, I joke about this, but I think this is part of the element of what's going on here, is that they have to use these chemtrails and they call it geoengineering, but really what those are doing is they're trying to get the smog to come back. They got to keep us polluted down here so that we have bronchitis and asthma and all these other, non-specific respiratory illnesses. I love that one when they came out with that a few years ago. Non-specific respiratory illness. Oh, no, well, we don't know what it is. Yes, you do. You're giving it to us.
What were we suffering from in the 60s and 70s that the Clean Air Act took care of?
Lead.
Lead, okay.
Lead was in the fuel since the 1920s, since the 19-teens. They put lead in the gasoline so that it would make the valves run smoother in the engines. And then somebody got the bright idea, how about we make better engines, better valve trains, and they did, and they changed the formulation of the fuel to comply. California led the charge on that a lot of the way, but really it was about cleaning up the fuel. Now this whole other aspect of catalytic converters and such like this, really with just cleaner, better fuel and fuel efficiency, they sold a lot of little cars in the 1970s and ever since. They sold so many little cars that the United States gasoline market has flatlined. It's not a growing market, hasn't been for decades. The big growing markets are India and China. That's where they're selling all the gasoline. We've gotten more and more efficient, and now we're transiting into electric cars. That's going to mean even less fuel sales. But that's not the point. We could have had perfectly clean running engines in the 1960s with just by using properly tuned engines and clean fuel. Just cleaner the fuel. Take the sulfur out of it. Take the particulate matter out of it. Runs better, runs cleaner. And the other thing is if you have a vehicle that gets 50 miles to the gallon instead of 25, you're using half the fuel right there. And a lot of this did happen in big strides. And a lot of the pollution control that they're using today, the plumbing we call it, a lot of it's unnecessary. It actually concentrates nitric acids, nitric oxides. If you ever get behind a car and it smells like rotten eggs, well, that's a catalytic converter that has to deal with fuel that's too dirty for it. So they're using cheap fuel, low octane fuel with a catalytic converter that's not tuned properly, whatever. And that stink, that stuff, that's a concentrated. It's like there's less of the poison, but it's more poisonous. Go ahead. You have a thought.
Due process, though, should have our government protect us, and the court should.
Okay, all right. Now, the EPA got gutted by the Trump and Republican administrations, and a lot of the EPA rules and regulations were driven by the Democrats. But a lot of those regulations really don't solve any problems. It's more about revenue. And of course, the corporate world doesn't like it when their revenue gets tapped for taxes to pay for stuff. But the approach was wrong on both ends. Now, the Clean Air Act required that things needed to get cleaner, and how you get there wasn't really defined. However, we were getting there anyway, because of the impetus to make the air cleaner. And it worked so well that, the air got cleaner and health improved for many people in urban areas. And this is a big topic, and we're probably going to have to finish this topic on another show because I'm running out of time here, folks. But what I'm trying to say is that this geoengineering program really is a huge toxic dump on our heads. Because whatever they're spraying up there at 5,000, 10,000, 30,000 feet, it just comes right back down on us. And these are heavy metals, strontium, barium, aluminum, free aluminum. Doesn't exist in nature. It's got to be coming from somewhere. It's coming from the guys who are putting it there. And it's toxic. It's horribly toxic. And this 5G, the radiation from these emitters, very toxic, very damaging to the neurological systems. So if we had due process, the teeth in the EPA laws would have gone after these programs and shut them down.
Okay, you're talking about the Clean Air Act, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, maybe we should have the Free Speech Act. And then I thought, well, what about the Free Air Act? And by free means if you had access to the public's right of way or the commons, the resource that everybody needs, obviously that has to be protected. And whoever harms somebody, we have to hold these corporations. We have to follow the money. We have to find out who's making money from this cloud seeding or geoengineering or whatever, and not have our governments be buffers, be third parties that are protecting that, so that you can find the boards. And if there are innocent people on there who are misinformed by their lawyers, straighten it out. That's what free speech could be.
Well, here's the problem. The problem is organized crime.
Right.
And organized crime, you can use a lot of different words for it. Mafia, whatever. And this is a painful thing to say. They're running the show, folks. There is an invisible dark hand that has really put a pinch on due process. In real estate, in industry, in garbage management.
Well, again, back to free speech. You know, if you can come in front of your community and say whatever you need to say or want to say or feel obliged to say, you should be able to do it. And if you harm somebody, you know, if it's slander, you hurt their reputation, you hurt their business, then you should be accountable. But we're having this cloaking where we can't even do that. For those that are courageous enough to go in front of the camera, they should be able to do it. And for those who want to hear that kind of material, they shouldn't be intimidated that we're going in this direction of IP address discrimination. That's what the beauty of the radio. Nobody knows what channel you're listening to. They're not profiling you. And you see what I'm saying? People are fearful to stand up. And due process, you know, there have been gangs ever since the beginning of time. Some are called gangs, some are called multinational corporations.
Well, by definition, they're still all gangs.
Yeah. And they're all made up of people.
You know, you just brought there's good reason to be afraid. 1 minute.
Yeah.
I just want to put out something I learned today. I saw a quick YouTube, and there's a woman researcher. I don't have her name off the top of my head right now, but I will come back at you at this. About 10 years ago, she started investigating the deaths of 12 naturopathic doctors, and that was over 10 years ago. The body count now is 80. There have been 80 suspicious deaths, murders, suicides, whatever you want to call them, of naturopathic doctors to date since she started researching it 10 years ago. So that's a little less than, that's about, 8 a year that we know about that have been murdered. So that's what I mean, you know, in answer to your question about the fear of going public or being a whistleblower, you could call it the Snowden syndrome. And that's kind of what, people are worried about. All right, so I'm going to sign off, folks. This is kind of exciting show to sign off on. It seemed like it went real quick. Thanks for watching Conant Show. See you next week. I'll be back with some more stuff. And thank you, Paula Gloria Barton, for teching for me and jumping in and helping make a great show.